Hi, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am thrilled that you are here. My name is Rhea Campbell. I'm an entrepreneur and an investor, and I am here with Dr. Alex Lickerman, who is also my husband. I'm going to be interviewing Alex. He's going to talk a little bit about his book, and he's going to talk about his entrepreneurial journey as well as his background as a physician. Alex, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background so that the audience understands who you are and where you came from.
Sure. So I was an academic physician at the University of Chicago for 20 years until I left in 2016 to found a direct primary care or a concierge primary care medical practice. So I've been a doctor for 30 years, but I've also been a speaker and an author. And I actually have written 2 books. I'm working on a third. And I guess your audience might be interested in the first.
Absolutely. In fact, the book is called The Undefeated Mind. And the reason that I am interviewing Alex, The Undefeated Mind, on the science of constructing an indestructible self. And the reason that I'm interviewing Alex today is because it is so important as an investor and an entrepreneur to really construct an indestructible self. There are a lot of concepts in this book that are absolutely crucial for you to implement when you are executing any sort of complicated or creative transaction that requires real grit. And I'm going to have Alex talk about a couple of the concepts. We're going to do this in a multi-part show. So he's only going to talk about a couple of the segments in here that I want to share with the audience that are absolutely relevant and important as you think about your entrepreneurial or your investing journey. So the book is called The Undefeated Mind. I'm going to turn it over to Alex. Why don't you talk about a couple of the concepts in here that are relevant?
Sure. So I guess first I should say I wrote this book because I was interested to learn if principles that were a part of a Buddhist philosophy that has existed for 2,500 years that were really in support of developing a resilient self, the type of Buddhism I used to practice but no longer do, has as its core tenet the idea that to be happy you have to be strong. And I was interested to know if a lot of these principles that have existed all this time actually now had modern scientific validity, if there was research that had been done to support these principles as actually contributing to a person's resilience. And it turned out, when I did the research, it did. There is a lot of evidence to support that. So the thesis of the book is that resilience is not something that only a lucky few of us are fortunate enough to be born with, or unlucky numbers of us are unfortunate enough to be born without, but something we all can take very specific steps, evidence-based steps, to actually improve in our own lives. So I think of this idea of resilience as a personality trait like any other that within an individual person has a range, right? We can be our least resilient self, and we can be our most resilient self. And depending on how we were born, some of us have a range that's sitting over here, others have a range that's sitting way over here, but within each person there is a range. And the idea here is, with the principles I write about in this book, there are things that you can do very practically to be operating as consistently as possible at the high end of your resilience range. So I can, if you want, just talk about a couple of the principles and tease people a little bit with sort of what's in the book to make them interested in reading it and learning how they can become more resilient themselves.
Yeah, that'd be great. In fact, the one that I really key into myself is expect obstacles. And the reason that I love that chapter is because when I am going into uncharted territory, or I'm working on a deal, a transaction, whether that be a commercial real estate transaction or a residential real estate transaction, whether I'm trying to acquire a home subject to seller finance and raising funds, whatever it is that I'm doing in my entrepreneurial journey, it's helpful for me to have a mindset where I'm going to expect obstacles so that I'm not surprised or crushed when I have great difficulty in front of me. So that was a really important chapter in the book that I'd love you to start talking about, if you don't mind.
So the whole principle of expecting obstacles is that by being prepared in your mind to encounter obstacles when you begin any new venture, the key here is there's evidence to suggest that expecting obstacles immunizes you against discouragement. That's the key, right? Because how many of us, we begin some journey, some project, some goal we have, and it ends up being harder than we thought. And so the problem with that is, as you encounter obstacles, especially obstacles you don't immediately know how to solve, you become discouraged. And discouragement is the best predictor of quitting. And if you quit, of course, you're never going to be successful. The most successful people actually don't fail less often than people who are not sure of. And if you quit, of course, you're never going to be successful. The most successful people actually don't fail less often than people who are not successful. They just, in fact, they fail more often. They just have more resilience. They just keep going until they reach that rare result of success. So there's evidence to suggest that while we cannot control how difficult a project may be and what obstacles may arise in the course of that project as we're working towards completion, but if we consciously set our mindset prior to beginning whatever we're doing with the notion that we're going to encounter not only obstacles that we don't expect, but obstacles we don't necessarily know how to solve. And by preparing ourselves to expect those unexpected obstacles and to expect to be in positions where we are stymied and don't know what to do next, simply by expecting that, we immunize ourselves against becoming discouraged when those obstacles do arise and increase the likelihood that we will overcome those obstacles. The best way to do this is to actually be able to anticipate obstacles that are realistic in whatever endeavor you're going up against. So whenever we're trying to do something we've never done before, we always think about finding a mentor. And that could be, a mentor could be a book, it could be a person, it could be a course, but something that's going to teach us how to do what it is we don't know yet how to do. What we don't think about is how we can use those exact same resources to predict what type of obstacles we ourselves may come up against when we're doing something that's new to us, because it's not new to everybody. In fact, to the people teaching us, it's not new at all. So in addition to asking those people and learning from those people about how to do what you want to do, you also want to ask them, what obstacles did you come up against? Because if you expect those obstacles, even if those aren't the ones you yourself are going to experience, but expecting some obstacles, when they invariably arise, as obstacles always do, you will be less likely to quit and therefore more likely to be successful.
That's awesome. Can I just tell you, one of the things that I always do when I'm walking into any sort of negotiation, any sort of situation, any sort of endeavor where typically I have a large, complicated transaction in front of me, I am always thinking about the ways that it can go sideways. And for me, it's like a big puzzle in my head. I'm always thinking about plan A, right? That's the preferred path that I want. But I set myself up also for plan B, C, and D, expecting that plan A may not go the way that I want, expecting an obstacle. And so what I do is I often try to give myself multiple paths to the end result. If I can't go here, then I'll go here. And if I can't go here, I'll go here. And so, but what I love about the expect obstacles is I never go into a situation feeling like it's going to be a straight line to the result. When it is a straight line to the result, it's phenomenal, and it's very rare that that happens. But for me, having a B, C, D, and maybe even an E path creates great comfort as I'm moving through a complicated transaction.
So I'm going to tell two stories, and then maybe we'll end this segment. The first one is there evidence that if you have a project you want to complete, and there's a series of steps you have to complete to achieve that obstacle or that goal. If you expect the first step to be easy and that it's going to be something you're going to be able to complete quickly, and you fail at it because it ends up being hard, compared to the situation when you expect that first step to be hard and you fail at it. In the first instance, you are far more likely to become discouraged and quit than in the second. So expecting things to be hard, again, immunizes you against discouragement. In the book, I talk about techniques by which you can actually develop that mindset and actually become practiced at doing that. And in fact, the example I want to give where I use this in my medical practice is when I have to give bad news to patients. So there's a story I tell the very first time I actually had to give bad news to a patient. It was actually that the patient had a terminal diagnosis. They had cancer. And before I went in to the room, I talked to my resident at the time. This is when I was an intern, who gave me some tips on how to do this. And I came in, and as he suggested I do, I stated the diagnosis clearly and unequivocally. I said, you came in, you had a shadow in your lung that we found by x-ray. We brought you into the hospital to biopsy it, and I'm afraid the news is not what we hoped. It is a lung cancer, and it looks as though it has metastasized. And then what I did was I launched into a soliloquy of all the things that this diagnosis meant, all the treatments we might try, all the side effects that those treatments might cause. I literally spoke for about half an hour, not even giving anyone in the room, much less the patient, a chance to interject anything. And when I finally ran out of things to say, I paused and I said to the patient, do you have any questions? And he got very quiet, and he looked out the window, and all he said, sort of under his breath, was, "Thought I had more time." And what I realized at that moment was that I had completely bungled the entire process. And that taught me a lesson, because as a doctor, when you go into a patient's room, the expectation is you're going to talk to them, and when you leave, they're going to feel better. But when you have to go in to give bad news, the expectation is they're going to feel worse. And if you're thinking you're going to somehow make it okay, which is what I was trying to do in that instance, you're going to fail. And so now, when I go in to give bad news to patients, which is thankfully rare, I pause at the doorway and I remind myself to expect that this is going to be hard and that the patient is going to feel worse than they do when I leave. Because what that does is it enables me to withstand my own anxiety about having to deliver that news. And so in the book, I talk about how you can creatively use this principle in situations where you have anxiety or where you're facing a task that you think you can accomplish but may be more difficult than you expect, and how you can prepare yourself mentally so that no matter how hard it is, you don't become discouraged and you actually can complete.
That's a great story. I'm going to end the segment here. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Alex, for talking a little bit about a couple of segments in the book. We are going to have a multi-part series, and we'll talk more about the segments in the book called The Undefeated Mind. You can find that on Amazon. It is an absolute fantastic read. It's great for mindset, expecting obstacles. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're an investor, or somebody that just likes to work on themselves and to have some self-knowledge and learning, get the book.